We were also delighted to receive a message from His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, and it's my privilege to read his words today. I am pleased to know that this conference, Empowering Real Change, Leadership for a Better World, is being hosted to commemorate the 150th anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi's birth. I consider myself a follower of Gandhiji. On my first visit to India in 1956, I visited Rajghat and was deeply moved as I prayed on the banks of the Yamuna. I wondered what wise counsel Gandhiji might have given me. And then, one winter, upon my return to Tibet, I had a dream in which I was meeting the Mahatma. Ever since, Gandhiji's engagement in ancient Indian wisdom has been a great inspiration to me. One of my life commitments is to do whatever it's possible to spread the message of ahimsa and karuna. Regrettably, I feel that we are facing a moral crisis caused by our society's overemphasis on wealth and material development at the expense of our basic human need for kindness, compassion, and concern for others. In order for our younger generations to possess these vital positive values, it is essential that our education system teach these qualities to help them become happy people with happy families living together in a happy society. We must appreciate the oneness of humanity and the responsibility that each of us has in promoting it. An educational framework that encourages people to develop inner values is essential and must be done in a secular way so that followers of all faith traditions are included, as well as the growing number of those who do not hold to a particular religion. All want happiness and all want to be free of suffering, whether they follow a religion or not. I'm committed to reviving interest in ancient Indian thought, as I believe this can be of immense value in transforming our destructive emotions and promoting basic inner qualities. As necessary as physical hygiene is to maintaining our physical fitness, cultivating emotional hygiene and learning to tackle our destructive emotions is essential to mental fitness. In this connection, elements of ancient Indian wisdom can be immensely helpful. India is unique in possessing the potential to combine its ancient knowledge with modern education in order to develop peace of mind. I'm encouraged by the growing interest that I find among young Indians who will hopefully contribute to the holistic development of applying ancient Indian techniques to bring about a positive state of mind in this country and eventually throughout the world. I hope that these ideas can be discussed during your conference and that they might be incorporated into your activities. This would, I believe, be a meaningful way of paying homage to Mahatma Gandhi. Thank you. His Holiness spoke about the need for society to focus on human values rather than have an overemphasis on material development. And he said that each of us has a responsibility to humanity. This sets the tone perfectly for our first panel of the day, Envisioning a Model Society. This panel explores a vision for a just society in the light of Gandhiji's ideas, as captured by Dr. Tridip Suhrud, and with a glimmer of their reflection, perhaps, in the unique concept of gross national happiness. But more on that from Dr. Saamdu Chetri. I now invite Dipti Sansgiri to host this panel. And may I invite our first panelist, Dr. Saamdu Chetri. And Dr. Tridip Suhrud, please join us. As a brief introduction, Dr. Chetri was born in a cowshed in rural Bhutan and has a PhD in commerce. After working for 25 years in the private and development sectors and 5 years in the PMO of the first democratically elected Prime Minister of Bhutan, he then founded the Gross National Happiness Center, Bhutan, and headed it for 6 years. He has been teaching, consulting, and speaking at various international and national occasions on mindfulness, ecology, governance, and gross national happiness, among others. This is in India, the Czech Republic, USA, Singapore, UK at the Parliament, Hong Kong, Philippines to the senators, Australia, Switzerland, Denmark, Sweden, Germany, Mexico, Vietnam, Thailand, Panama, Colombia, and the UAE. He has spoken in about 13 universities and several colleges around the world, and more than 8 universities and a few colleges in India. Recently, he's begun addressing international conferences over webinars and Skype. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Tridip Suhrud in a few words as well. Dr. Suhrud is a scholar, writer, and translator who works on the intellectual and cultural history of modern Gujarat and the Gandhian intellectual tradition. As the director and chief editor of the Sabarmati Ashram Preservation and Memorial Trust, he was responsible for creating the world's largest digital archive on Gandhiji, the Gandhi Heritage Portal. He has authored 28 books, which include the critical edition of Hind Swaraj, Narayan Desai's 4-volume biography of Gandhi, My Life is My Message, and the 4-volume epic Gujarati novel, Saraswati Chandra. His most recent work is a critical edition of Gandhiji's autobiography, My Experiments with Truth, in 2 languages, Gujarati and English. Dr. Suhrud is presently translating the diaries of Manu Gandhi, compiling a series of unpublished correspondence titled Letters to Gandhi, and working on an 8-volume compendium of testimonies of the indigo cultivators of Champaran. He's professor and director archives at CEPT University, Ahmedabad, and serves as chairman of the governing council of MICA. With that, Dipti, over to you.
Thank you, and especially, I know you are in pain, but thank you so much for being here. I think the appropriate, after His Holiness Dalai Lama's message for us, when we talk about empowering real change, we normally, immediate association is with change in the society because that impacts us directly. And perhaps today, more than ever, the need for exploring ideas that can help us bring about this change is acute. And therefore, we really look forward to getting some practical insights and inputs from both of you. Thank you very much. Dr. Chetri, Gandhiji wrote a lot about, in his book Hind Swaraj, about the malaise of modern civilization. Today, the whole world is obsessed with materialistic growth, and GDP seems to be the benchmark for measuring the growth and development of humanity. In that context, Gross National Happiness Index has emerged as a very unusual way of measuring growth in the society. Please tell us, what is this model of measuring happiness and harmony in the society?
Well, as the mic gets organized, let me just say that my introduction is incomplete if I do not say that I was born in a cowshed and brought up with animals as I grew up. So I come from a very remote part of the country. I'm a little bit in a mess. I've hurt myself, not because I wanted to show you this way. As Deepti mentioned, that GDP today is the conventional measure for economic development. And when our king was as young as 16 years old, he realized that the ultimate goal of every human being was to be happy. And he thought, what could be those things that can make people happy? So when he was just 16 years old, his father expired, and he started to go to every home to ask the people in Bhutan, asking them, what can I do to make you happy? And of course, everybody said, oh, great king, whatever you bring to us, we'll be happy. He said, that's not the right way. You need to have your autonomy. You need to pursue your own happiness. I cannot give you happiness. And that's where he realized that, there were different things that were required for human being to be happy, as opposed to the material world where there was so much of production and consumption, so much of waste in the world. He realized that this waste was so high that if he copied this model of economic development for the country, Bhutan would be wiped out within no time. So I think the other great thing that Bhutan lived with was in isolation, and we had the choice to grow with how the world was, looking at the world as an example. We could build ourselves on this concept. He propounded actually here in Mumbai in 1979 when he was traveling through after a meeting in Havana on non-allied movement. When a young journalist asked him, what is the GDP of your country, a small country up on the Himalayas? And he said, for me and my country, gross national happiness is more important than gross domestic product. Now, just to give you simple examples, gross domestic product can grow by unhealthy society. It can also grow by unhealthy ecology. When you destroy ecology, GDP grows. When you are unhealthy, GDP grows. You have too many of alcoholics, smokers, drug abusers, GDP seems to grow. But what about the happiness of the people, of the society? So therefore, the whole concept was developed over time, and we started to live with it. But the world didn't believe us that we live with it. So they said, how do you measure it? And the question came, how do we measure? And we said, we don't measure it. And it was in 1998 that Bhutan was invited to a regional UN summit in Seoul, where one of our former Prime Minister, Jigme Thinley, spoke for the first time outside Bhutan about the concept of gross national happiness. Then after that, UN actually gave us support, money, to work on the concept of developing measures for gross national happiness. Today we do measure. So we have like 9 domains to measure. And please, the concept of gross national happiness, happiness is very individual, is a choice of yours. We cannot measure happiness, and we do not measure happiness. So let me make it very clear, the concept of gross national happiness, the happiness we measure in the concept is to serve others, to live in harmony with nature, and realize your own inner potentials. That's what we mean by happiness in GNH. And therefore, we came up with these 9 domains of GNH, which you can Google and find out. Is simple: good governance or self-governance, time use, psychological well-being, community vitality, cultural resilience and diversity, living standards, health, education, and your connection with ecology. These are the 9 domains that are very much required to bring a balance between spiritual needs of a person and the material needs of a person. So we say that if you can have 50%, below 50% of the conditions within these 9 domains, then you are not happy. But if you are between 50 to 65% of the conditions in these 9 domains, we rate that person being narrowly happy. If the person is above 66 to 76% of the domains, then we tag the person as being extensively happy. And if the person is more than 77%, we say he has more than enough conditions to pursue his or her own happiness, so he is or she is deeply happy. So that's how we try to measure. We have like 33 indicators, which are actually divided. It's not a responsibility of the government. Of the 33 indicators, 16 of them are individual and family responsibilities. 6 of them are community responsibilities. If you live in a community, we believe in the concept, we think that this gross national happiness concept can bring you a holistic approach, it can bring you a collective approach, it can bring you an equitable approach, a sustainable approach in the whole mechanism of development. So we do not consider development for the sake of development. I'll give you an example. When Vietnam was wiped away after 30 years of war by Americans, it was left at ground zero. On 30th of April 2013, they celebrated 40 years of their independence or their growth, and Bhutan is already on the line for last 60 years. If I compare Bhutan with Vietnam, we stand nowhere in terms of technology, infrastructure that they have gone through with. But what we still own or have is happiness, as opposed to what Vietnam does not. So you see, there, of course, I do not say that we do not need development. We do need development, but how much is the big question that arises here. So therefore, to be happy in our country, we are taught right at our childhood, be content with what you have. That's the first stage of our understanding of the self. So we try to not pursue something that's beyond us before we accept what we have. We learn to accept that very thing, and every Bhutanese lives with abundance of relationship, whether it's within the family, within the collective community, or be it with nature. No Bhutanese would cut a tree without praying to it or planting 10 more for what he would harvest out. He would never dig anything out. Even plucking a plant out, he would say, I need you, forgive me, I need you. He would also pray in a water hole. If there's a spring coming out, he would sit there and pray for the water. Because we know that, like what in India you say, Bhagavan. Bha stands for Bhumi, Ga for Gagan, and there is A in between, which is Agni, the fire, Va for Vayu, and Na for Nir, water. We are elements of these 5 elements of the nature, and nature is in us, and we are in nature. Now, in fact, quantum physics goes and proves that 91% of frog genes are in us, 70% of banana genes are in us, quarter of rice genes are in us. You can continue, 46% of fruit fly genes are in us. The whole nature is in us. 75% of water contains in us. And if we cannot be compassionate to either of these things, how can you be compassionate to yourself? And when you are able to be compassionate to yourself, then you are able to be compassionate to the whole world. That's how we look. And the spirituality that we define is to be compassionate and to serve others.
Dr. Suhrud, Gandhiji in his book, India of My Dreams, among many things that are compiled over there, the 2 thoughts, one, the Swaraj, self-rule, not only of independent nation, but the ability of the man to master the mind that he has, and also the Sarvodaya, which is growth and prosperity for all. If you were to draw a picture of Gandhi's dream nation, a just society, using these ideas, what would it look like? Can you tell us about it?
To be very honest, I don't know. But let's look at what these 2 terms mean and see whether they make sense to us today. The word Swaraj has, it's usually seen as independence. It's not. In the Hind Swaraj, he thinks of Swaraj in 2 ways, both as self-rule, but also rule over ourselves. Now, what is this capacity to rule ourselves is the question, and that's what he spoke about. What is the notion of limits that we work with? Because self-rule requires notion of limits, notion of boundaries, a deep understanding of who we are and where we wish to be, without which the idea of independence is untenable. It's not about each unto herself or himself. It's each recognizing the boundaries within which we need to function, from which would emerge a notion of citizenship, from which it would emerge notion of our responsibility to fellow citizens, whether it comes as corporate social responsibility, whether it comes as philanthropy, whether it comes as charity or trusteeship. But there is a responsibility. From there, the idea of the public sphere would come. What kind of public sphere do we want? Do we want a public sphere that recognizes our self-will? So the notion of Swaraj is much larger, or was much larger than what mere political independence would suggest. And the word Sarvodaya has a very interesting history. It actually is, picture this young man going on a train. Friend comes to the Durban railway station to drop him off and says, read this, it's a long journey, trains are slow, but on time, but they are slow, overnight, and that's unto this last. Ruskin's unto this last is given to this young Gandhi. And all of us know the parable of the vineyard. It comes from the parable of the vineyard from the New Testament. And Gandhi is struck by what the parable of the vineyard and unto this last meant. And he decided, like everything else, he needed to share it with people. How do you share it? One, that you practice it, and which led to the establishment, the first ashram-like community in South Africa called Phoenix. The origins of the ashram actually lie in that book called Unto This Last. But then he decided to translate it. And he was a very self-confident translator, unlike me. I'm very faithful to the text. Gandhi was not. Gandhi made the text his own and did things with it. And he changed. And it's no longer John Ruskin's Unto This Last. It's Gandhi's Sarvodaya. Now, Unto This Last would actually be translated in Gujarati as Antyodaya, of the last person. Gandhi says it's not of the last person only, it is of Sarvodaya, of all people, but not just all people, in every sphere. Sarva Udaya. Yeah. It's not about one aspect of our life that we need Udaya of. It is what we call all aspects of our lives, both collective as also personal, that we need Udaya of. So, if you put Sarvodaya and Swaraj, capacities for self-governance, and this desire to have a kind of a blooming of all of us in all spheres of our life, we would have a very different society. We would have a very different country. We would be very different people. Now, is that what we want? We don't know. We've chosen a path, and that's a path of our own making. And is this path irreversible? Is this irreversible? These are the questions that we need to ask. What are the kinds of limits that we want?
Yep.
Right? And I think so to say, oh, let's go the Gandhian way, I think it's not possible. Not possible without a very serious debate in our economy, in our society, in our polity, because it might actually need fundamental questions.
Yep. In that context, Gandhiji dedicated his whole life to the pursuit of truth. He actually lived, as we said, experiments of his life in all the spheres of his life. And today, in this post-modernist world, idea of following truth almost seems impractical and utopic. What were his practical arguments and his personal examples that we can use to make this idea of pursuit of truth real for us today?
Well, I know the argument that truth is under large questions, right? But I get up every morning and I look at myself in the mirror and I do recognize myself as Tridip Suhrud. If I did not, if I denied that truth, I would be what you would call clinically schizophrenic. Now,
but who is that Tridip Suhrud?
Right, so that's the question that we need to ask. And what aspects do I recognize of myself? Yes. But do I first deny myself? Now, so to say that there is no truth or that there is no possibility of truth is to actually have a society which is deeply schizophrenic. Now, if that's where we want to be my guest. Because then we would not recognize ourselves, we would not recognize the community that we're part of, the nations that we're part of or not part of. Okay? So that's one. Two, this is not an abstract notion. We are by and large truthful people. All of us are capable of truth. All of us are capable of truth in large measures. And it's not about petty lying that we're talking about. It's not about rule breaking that we're talking about. We know the right from wrong in every instance. It is what we lack is the capacity sometimes to act upon that knowledge.
Exactly.
Right? Now, all of us know that something is wrong. Sometimes we do not have the wherewithal to act upon it. I think the importance of somebody like Gandhi and somebody like Dalai Lama that we spoke of, very beautifully he spoke of his debt to Gandhi in that letter. What is he saying? It is really the capacity to act upon the recognition of right and wrong, which makes us a better person, a better and a just society. That's one. So I think Gandhi's great contribution to India and to rest of us is not about the idea of truth only. It's also the idea of fearlessness. It's abhaya. Without bhaya, without fear, this fear that incapacitates, makes us completely incapable of acting, thinking, doing right in all instances, is really what. So Gandhi's great experiment is not necessarily about truth. It's about to acquire the capacity to act upon the recognition of that truth.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
And to do so in each instance. And that's really where the challenge lies. Yes. Because we do see a lot that impinges upon our conscience, which makes us uneasy. But sometimes we lack either the will, the capacity, the wherewithal, or even the right action.
True.
So that's really, I think,
that's the path of philosophy. Absolutely. Dr. Chetri, you mentioned earlier, and it's very inspiring and heartening to note that compassion, altruism are part of the measures of the Gross National Happiness Index and the holistic model that you talk about, where there is a role of each of individual, community, and the state. How does it practically work out in the way it is implemented, or you ensure that it's happening?
Mm-hmm. Basically, actually, coming to this concept of truth, what we have started doing is we begin the education already in the school system, so-called sanskar, the values, in Sanskrit. These values are lived in schools now in Bhutan, because we realize that education today makes people very competitive, very shrewd, very selfish, and we need to change the patterns of education. I'm not talking about syllabus, but I'm talking about parents out here who want their children to be somebody they are not born for. And we push them so hard that by the time they're 12 to 14 years old, they are already in depression, in anxiety, and they are in antidepressant drugs. So what kind of future? We really live in a very paradoxical world. We want our children to be happy, but they are already in antidepressant drugs by the age they are 14, 15. So what kind of future are we really transacting for ourselves? The greed that we have, the greed that we live with, today World Bank measures like 1.6 times of the biocapacity that we consume today. In other words, we are, indebting our children and grandchildren. How can we overcome this whole concept by bringing values in the education system? So what we generally do is culture plays a very big role. And I just was Googling here with my mobile. I'll just read it out for you. I'm sure you would have read this sometime, but might be very interesting to. This is an address by Lord T.B. Maule to the British Parliament on 2nd of February 1835. And this is an abstract from there. I have traveled across the length and breadth of India, and I have not seen one person who is a beggar, who is a thief. Such wealth I have seen in this country, such high moral values, people of such caliber, that I do not think we would ever conquer this country unless we break the very backbone of this nation, which is her spiritual, and cultural heritage, and therefore I propose that we replace her old ancient education system, her culture, for if the Indians think that all that is foreign and English is good and greater than their own, they will lose their self-esteem, their native culture, and they will become what we want them, a truly dominated nation. That's an address. So look, what kind of education we are considering ourselves here. What Bhutan is trying to do with this indicators is we're trying to bring, like I said, of the 33 indicators, 16 of them are individual. So we try to bring the values in children. How do they manage their time? How do they, bring trust within their own families, within their own communities? This becomes very, very essential. I have an abbreviation for a word called love. I say live on values every day. And if you learn to live on these values every day, that's the love, the foundation of everything, on which there are 4 pillars that get nurtured. If you love unconditionally anybody, first one is I have also abbreviation for these 4 pillars. I call them RICH, R-I-C-H. R stands for relationship. When you're able to build relationship with yourself and with others. Integrity, I for integrity. What you speak, you do. What you do, you say. Or be very truthful. And C stands for compassion. When you are not able to be, often education teaches us to have self-esteem. The Maslow's hierarchical law, they say, you have to be self-actualized or self-esteem. These are wrong totally. When you climb a mountain, when you're on the top of the mountain, what is next? You have to descend down or you have to remain there. That's self-esteem. You will always fall short of it. But if you're self-compassionate, both of these are with you, whether it's self-esteem or self-compassion. This is very important for us to understand ourselves. When you are self-compassionate, then you understand others, because like what Sir just mentioned, that how many of us stand in front of the mirror and say, you guy, who are you? Why are you here? What are your purposes in life? I don't think we ask this kind of things to this person that we see in the mirror and create a pathway in our brains like Mahatma Gandhi did. He had a vision statement that said, I'll defeat all untruth with truth. That was the first statement he made. The second one he made was, I will not fear anybody except God. Likewise, he had 4 or 5 statements. And we can all live, we can be the change to see what change we want in others by just creating these values in us. If you get up in the morning and say, I have 24 hours in front of me, what do I do in 2 Gs? Gratitude and giving. What do I do today? You create a pathway. If you repeat every day over 22 days or so, 21 days, then you create, they talk about, and the neuroscientists talk about neuroplasticity. You can create a pathway in your mind and you will see the world as you believe, because you have created that in your image, in your mind. So compassion is very important. Then humanity, H stands for humanity. When you have humanity, that's of course caring, serving others. I'll give you an example. 3 years ago, I had an opportunity to speak at the House of Parliament, in the Commons, in British Parliament actually. And as I took off from Delhi on the British Airways, the first general announcement that came out was, if you donate £1, you're going to feed a very hungry and cold child in remote England. I thought I heard wrong. So I fished out of the seat pocket to read, and it was true. Then I thought about England, whose empire was so large that the sun never set. And they have made so much of wealth, Today it's begging. I then compared the wealth of England with my little country, and I thought, wow, 100,000 part of it could not even be my wealth of my country. And I felt very rich, because if we see a hungry and a cold child in Bhutan streets, the first thing that every Bhutanese does is goes to find out what is the problem with that child, takes the responsibility of that child until we find a solution. So we still care, we still share. This is very important. Thank you. Thank you. And when you build on this, the roof of trust automatically comes. So love, rich and trust. They work together. So try and bring this love unconditional to everybody. Let me just say something about time use. So we sensitize all these areas, very much. We ask, in fact, children, do you trust your family? Do you love them? Do they love you? Do they care for you? How much care do you give them? Or do you care for yourself? All these questions are very relevant in our education system there. But let me tell you something. How does the world use time? This is, I think, very paramount here. Let me just say that there was a research done in America. On an average, if you average the whole world, the life expectancy comes to about 78 years. In these 78 years, we sleep 28 years of our lifetime. 10 years of our lifetime, we're chasing for more and more, greed-based. We don't share, but we try to earn more and more, only chase material side of our life. It's only 6 years of a life we give for our self-grooming and education. 4 years of our life we are eating and drinking only. 6 years of our life we are busy in house chorus, cleaning, washing ourselves. Okay? 2 years of our life we are shopping only. 2 years of our life we are traveling, commuting and getting jammed in traffics. It's now on an average 4 years of our life we give on social media. And India, if you just take India out, it's 7 years of your life that you spend behind social media. You'll wonder, now the paradox comes. How much time do you give to your children? Both parents working. Your children gets the values from your nanny. What values does that child get from a nanny? You spend only 1.5 years of your lifetime for your child, who you call the future of the nation. When you add all this life together, you only have left 10 to 12 years of your life expectancy, Now you are old, you are retired. You want to live better and longer. So all that you earn in 10 years, now you are going to throw behind a doctor, running to cure yourself and buy more medication like what I'm doing now. Is that life? Do we want to create that kind of a life for everybody? You can change that right here and now. That's the change that Mahatma Gandhi is talking about. Thank you.
And just to... You did mention about culture, and there is in GNH a lot of focus on revival of the old traditions. What's the relevance? Many people may not recognize the significance. What would you say is the significance of reviving kind of the roots and the traditions for the modern world?
Right. In fact, I just read out that address to the British Parliament. When culture plays such a big role, culture actually is the basis for our existence. And Bhutan has been very lucky because we were never colonized. And then we lived in isolation, so we try to carry on with our culture. Today, anyone you go to Bhutan, you'll see everybody smiling, everybody very happy, simply because we still live with our abundance of our culture. And that culture we talk about, which is very much a part of Indian culture, heritage very much, which can be revived. You should not react like the Australians. If you ask Australian, what is your culture? They start scratching their head and thinking, where do I come from in the first place, So they have lost totally. But India, you can still revive everything because of the diversity that you have, of the languages that you have. I don't know, something like 2,000 something languages that you speak. There's so much of value, But every Indian you ask, what is your dream? Oh, America. That's an Indian dream. And today you should appreciate the CEO of Google, Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Microsoft. All these guys who have done wonders are Indians. They're chasing their dream for somebody else. The same thing can be chased back in India here. And I think we should ask our prime ministers of India to look into this kind of thing and give them the possibility to work here. The mind has gone so far away that, sorry, I'm just, derouting a little bit because it's very interesting. Today, the artificial intelligence, what are they doing? You know, they have created a very small drone that can land on the middle of your palm. It can be fed with information of me, with my photograph, my name, where I live, everything. And it contains 3 grams of explosive. Now I just trigger it, go and hit Saamdu. It just goes. Nothing can stop it, nor running trains or... Now it will come and hide somewhere in my house. If I have changed my face in the meantime, I had an accident and I took a surgery, so my face has changed a bit. So it will come and hide and start watching me. It's not the same face, address is right, you know. So it's watching me. The moment Deepti comes in and says, "Hi Saamdu, how are you?" It'll come and hit me on my forehead and I'm dead there. Just throw 3 grams of explosive right in my brains. This is also creation of great minds. And these minds come from this land. Can these minds not come back here and create a better world? And I promise you, if all Indians return to India and work here, India will be the greatest nation on this planet. Very easily. Very easily. How can you draw them back? And this is us, parents. You need to blame yourself. You have made your children greedy. You have made your children go for the green money, the dollars. And you don't know. I've seen parents who are sick, who are dead. Children are in America. They have no time to come back. When they come back, their cremation is over. Is that the life you really want? I know of many parents who have flats in Mumbai, in Delhi, in Kolkata. 2 of them. Nobody here. And one day they are dead. What happens? You know, what are we doing really? What are we doing? Can we not change our mindset a little bit and come back to our culture that is so very radiant, so very strong, so very grounded, the Indian culture I'm talking about? Can we not come back to this? And I am sure we all can come back because sanskar still lives in India.
Indeed. You have dedicated, I think, a number of years in investigating ideas of Gandhiji. In terms of today's world, his ideas, what would you say in terms of, through your journey of investigating Gandhi and what you got inspired by through his ideas, what would you say is very relevant today in today's world?
There are 2 ways of answering that. One is that, let's forget Gandhi. We shot him with a finality, 3 bullets in his body. That's what we wanted. So let's not beat our chest and say, oh, is he relevant? He was not relevant for independent India. We couldn't keep him. That's one very real response that we need to own up to. And that's a fact. No denying it. And if we put him aside, put the man aside, because the man was very troublesome, very problematic, not easy to live with. Every time you're having a good time, he will come and pop your party. Right? Induces great amount of guilt. Right? So put the person aside and ask yourself 3 questions. Very simply. Are we in a just society? And not just only in terms of technical legal justice that we dispense quite routinely, but two questions. Is the violence of poverty unnerves us? Does the violence of intolerance unnerve us? That's one question. 2, do we think that as a civilization, not just as a nation state, but as a civilization, have we lived up to our potential? And 3, are we happy with our times? Not with only ourselves, but with our times. And if the answer to any of these questions is no, then you need teachers, you need allies. And I think one of them, not the only one, but one of that ally is a man called Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi. Don't make him the sole guide, because that's also very troublesome. Don't wish to necessarily give that kind of hegemonic power to that person. You shouldn't. No society should. But if you think that your times are interesting times, that you are uneasy with your life, with your society, with the paths that civilization is taking, that there is this corrosive violence of poverty and intolerance that we are surrounded by, then you're going to need pointers. And I think one of those pointers would be M.K. Gandhi. There could be many others. So that's two. Three, also let's not forget that I think, what was very good about him was that he was a deeply flawed person.
And he acknowledged it.
Right? I think, we are used to leaders who say, look at me, I'm perfect. I'm the most good-looking guy, I'm the richest guy, I wear the nicest clothes, and I do everything right. Here is this person who's deeply flawed. I think we need flawed leaders. I think that's really the reason why he's so attractive as a person. He draws you to him is not because of his gifts, which are apparent, but this deep, flawed human being that he is, constantly struggling with himself, constantly struggling with us, constantly struggling with the empire, but largely with himself and all the, So this idea that, people say he's evolving. Yes, but so are his flaws. And that's what makes him so very fascinating. So if we actually want a better world and a leader for a better world, let's start looking for flawed people who are ready to admit to their flaws, lead us like that.
Dr. Chetri, you have already shared a lot in terms of what today's young generation should take from the GNH experiment that should I still call it experiment? The way of measuring development and prosperity in Bhutan. What would you give as your message, still something more to the young generation? How do we measure in our own lives this index of happiness, and what do we need to do for that?
Well, I think you don't need to do anything much, but be yourself. That's the first thing, be yourself. The moment you begin to compare and compete, you are unhappy. You stress out yourself. But compete yourself. What you did yesterday, do it better today. Okay, that's competing yourself. Like Mahatma Gandhi never competed anybody. He lived with values that you can create in your mind. So live with yourself, number one. Number two, have right intentions of whatever you do. The way you think, the way you behave. This is values, we talk about. So have right intentions. Accept things as they are and let it go. Because if you hang on them, you will never be happy, because you will preoccupy your mind with so many things. So, learn that tactics. Say sorry and thank you every moment you have a chance, It's a beautiful word. And like I said, try to practice the 2 G's, gratitude. Write every day a note. What are you grateful for, or who are you grateful for? Why are you grateful for? And how does that help you? Write every day a few sentences on that. And write also one thing that you did good today. Come back on that once in a month to review what you have done. It can be as little as, today someone gave you a way on the door, or let you, held the door. You're grateful for it. So it can be as little as that, So try to practice these things and be yourself all the time. Don't try to bring any competitions in your life. You will always be happy. This is a simple practice, and care for yourself. Please care for yourself. Do not live a life without looking into who you are, what you want to be. Watch in the mirror every day and convince yourself that you can do better just by yourself. Thank you.
Dr. Suhrud, Gandhiji spoke about, the duties and rights. Today's generation is very conscious about the rights. And he said to have the right, first you need to perform your duty. And maybe in that context, would you like to give your message to or your words?
No, I don't, I'm a historian. I'm a deeply skeptical historian and a political theorist. I have no messages. Right? I only scrutinize other people. Very comforting, very comforting. I think, all that we've said and all that Dr. Chetri said, the question that we need to ask ourselves, and not just as human beings, not just as people, but as citizens, largely citizens. What is the source of our rights? Is the source of our rights this document called the Constitution that we can change? Or some men sitting in the Supreme Court can interpret? Is that the source of our rights? If that's the source of rights, it's a very flimsy source. And we should be very worried about it. But if the source of our rights is something other than a legal parchment, there is hope. There is possibility that we could actually claim rights and continue to claim rights in absence of such a document. And I think not just Gandhi, but Dr. Ambedkar would very, very clearly say that without the performance of certain duties, rights do not emanate only from law. And these duties are to the nature, are to future, are to fellow beings, right? Do we own the future? Right? The answer is no. But we do behave as if we own the future. Now, so I think there is something problematic about this rights discourse which looks at rights in absence of or divorce from performance of duties. This is Bombay, and a lot of people would understand Gujarati Hindi. Right? There's a very beautiful word, which is Gujarati Hindi word, Sanskrit word, called dharmada. Yeah? You walk out in the streets of Kaf Parade and you would see a lot of these things which are dharmada, which is dharma adaya, something that you do as an obligation to others, not to a text, not to a religion, dharmada. Right? I think the idea of rights is based on dharmada. What is it that you do as dharma adaya, which makes us, I think, more capable of enjoying our rights? So that's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Chetri. Thank you, Dr. Suhrud, for this invaluable insights on if we have to build a better world, then I think the change needs to begin with us to build a better society. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dipti, and thank you very much, Dr. Chetri and Dr. Suhrud, for that lovely conversation. As you step off stage, we have a small token of our gratitude for being with us here today.